Thanks for staying up later. Bob Seger is with us tonight. His most recent album, Fire Inside, was Grammy nominated, and you know him from songs like Old Time Rock and Roll and Night Moves and Against the Wind and Still the Same and Like a Rock, and we'll talk about as many of them as we can over the next half hour or so. But let's start at the beginning, as they say. What were your earliest recollections? What are your earliest recollections of rock and roll?
Oh, right back to the beginning. Bill Haley and the Comets. I heard that the other day on. I heard Shake, Rattle, and Roll on a college radio station the other day. It still rocks like crazy.
Yeah.
And then shortly thereafter, all the real seminal figures like Elvis and Little Richard and Fats Domino, Jerry Lee Lewis. You know.
I read somewhere, might have been a Rolling Stone story some years ago, about you lying in bed with the transistor radio.
Yeah.
And I'd be doing that as a kid of 10 or 11, but usually listening to baseball games. You were picking up out-of-town rock and roll stations, right?
Right. I lived in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and for some reason, we could get this station, WLAC, Nashville, which was a 50,000 watter, and late at night, they had this guy named John R. the Horseman, and he played Southern R&B, just this great stuff like James Brown, Wilson Pickett, Solomon Burke, Garnett Mims, the Tams, all these gritty Southern R&B, gospel-oriented vocalists, and that's what I used to listen to. That's what all my crowd, my bunch, listened to in high school. Yeah.
It seems like you've been around and successful for a long time, but you didn't really hit nationally until around the mid-'70s. I mean, you had a recording contract, but it wasn't until Night Moves, really, in 75 or 76, right?
Yeah, Live Bullet did real well, and then Night Moves came out 6 months later. And the two of them went platinum almost at the same time, real quickly. And it was we went straight from station wagons to jets, as it were. And, and never looked back.
You opened for or toured with, even before you were nationally known, some memorable acts, right? Dan Hicks and his Hot Licks for a while.
Yep.
REO Speedwagon for a while.
REO Speedwagon, Aerosmith, they were just starting out. Bachman Turner Overdrive. Kiss, when they were just starting out, that was an interesting audience to find.
I wouldn't think Kiss's audience would be Bob Seger's audience.
They were very young, and so occasionally we go to, I think it was Philadelphia Spectrum, and we started playing about 20 minutes earlier. It was Kiss, the Kiss Army. And so, but they were really, every act, I must say, was really kind to us, and as a matter of fact, those guys came back and apologized to us after our show and stuff. But we did about 70 shows with those guys, and they were really nice guys.
What was the show in Festus, Missouri?
Yeah, right. Ted Nugent and I played Festus, Missouri. It was in a cave, a literal cave. And you try to play rock and roll in a cave, and with about a 25-foot ceiling, and you're not going to be able to hear much. It's bashing around pretty good. That was an interesting one. Yeah.
What was the crowd like in the cave?
They were having a great time. It was in the summer.
Were they dressed in loincloths and stuff? It was like Fred and Wilma?
Well, it was more Ted's crowd, because he had played there more than we had. So they were pretty head-banging sort of crowd, and they were having a good time. They were feeling good. It was during the day, and the only good thing about it was that it was cool in the cave, as opposed to outside. It was about 100
before they had to build that fire to cook the meat. What comes to mind if I say the Roselit Inn?
The Roseland Inn?
Maybe that's it.
Oh, the Roseland Inn. That was one of our great bookings in the mid '60s. I don't think we had a record contract then. This is about '64. It was fine on the weekends. It was all college kids, and it was a big place, and they would dance and have fun. But on the weeknights, which we also had to play with our contract, there was nothing but traveling salesmen, guys, and there were strippers. Okay, and I mean, this was the last stop for strippers too. These it was the dead end. They couldn't go any lower, and so we'd play behind 3 15-minute shows a night. Played some pretty interesting stuff like Honky Tonk and Caravan, and of course the Stripper by David Rose and all that. And we just sort of lean up against the wall, and they'd have these wild shows. One would use like a black light. She'd put it on the floor, and she was half ape and half woman.
That's the oldest trick in the book. I'm tired of seeing that. She's half ape and half woman?
Yeah, and the ape is attacking the woman, and she's rolling around.
Well, what an identity complex.
Yeah, another one. Well, one brought a horse in, and another one had a big boa constrictor, and it was an interesting place. We played there about 9 months.
These were attractive women, I take it.
No. Not even remotely. No. No.
Let me backtrack. What's the first record you ever remember buying as a kid?
Come and Go With Me by the Del Vikings.
Yeah, sure. Was
the first single I ever bought. And I think right after that I bought a Frankie Lyman and the Teenagers song. I think it was Why Do Fools Fall in Love, or I Want You to Be My Girl, one or the other. Then Elvis, yeah. Mm-hmm.
I bought Runaround Sue.
78s too.
78?
Yeah, my dad had a 78.
Yeah. I bought a 45 of Runaround Sue in 1961. I was 9 years old, and it cost 49 cents.
Yeah.
And that was when nobody wanted to buy an album, because the notion of buying an album was you'd get 2 good songs,
right,
and have to listen to a bunch of lousy songs that they just
it was absolutely true.
Yeah.
Yeah. Another thing back then, I don't know if you remember the album covers. There were some doozies. There were some pretty terrible album covers.
Oh, yeah.
Especially Motown. I hate to say that because I'm from the city, but they had some of the worst album covers I've ever seen. But it was basically true. It wasn't until, I think, the 60s, really, until albums got consistently good throughout. There were exceptions, like Phil Spector in the early 60s did some great stuff. Yeah.
Your Spector influence to some extent?
Oh, I loved his stuff, yeah. I was in high school and I think Bruce Springsteen's another big Spector fan, and that wall of sound was just so passionate and profound, I mean, it just was very soulful, I thought.
This is certainly not an original observation, but the beginning of Born to Run is pure wall of sound.
Yeah.
Now, that's direct Spector stuff.
Yeah, and a little bit of Locomotion thrown in there, too. But and I like that. I mean, I've always wanted to cut a song that way. I haven't yet. I've written several that were Stone Spector, just to pay homage to that.
Is Night Moves, all things considered, your best song?
I don't know. People ask me what they think my best song. I think there's about 15 of them that I think are really good, and I don't like to say this is better than that. I don't know. It's a good one. It certainly launched my career. When I remember when we were mixing it, and I called up my manager and I said, "Boy, this is a big winner," And I said, "It doesn't matter what mix you listen to. This thing sounds great. This is, I think we got a big hit record here." And then this fella at Capitol heard it and called me back, said, "That's a career record." I said, "What's that?" He says, "You now have a career." That's strong. Yeah.
How does it make you feel now when songs like yours fit so well to other people's ideas? And I've seen in sports settings Against the Wind used as a backdrop for somebody who had to overcome some adversity.
And famous of course, final scene was going to be used if Muhammad Ali lost a fight, they called me and told me, but he won the fight. Yeah, right.
And of course, Old Time Rock and Roll. I mean, Tom Cruise took that to
it's good. It makes me feel good. I mean, that's the idea. That's what you try to do as a songwriter. You try to touch something universal, hopefully, in the lyric. Something that just says, "Oh yeah, I felt that way," and I haven't quite heard it said that way. And if you can accomplish that, I think that's the highest calling you can do as a songwriter.
Is that attitude of Old Time Rock and Roll still the way you feel?
Oh,
I mean, it definitely rings true for me, not just because I like the sort of thing you do, but because I don't know whether this is a sign of encroaching old age or if it's the right perspective, but there isn't that much of what I hear coming out today that I latch onto.
No, there's a couple of good young groups. Guns N' Roses has got the rock and roll spirit, I think, in their music, and I think Black Crowes, and I think it'll always be around. The heavy metal is just basically very extreme rock and roll. You know, it's all based on a lot of the '50s stuff, but I don't know. I think it'll survive. It's just too infectious, you know. Still, some of my favorite stuff is that real explosive '50s stuff. I mean, it was just plain explosive for about 3 years there, when radio was brave enough to play it. You know, 55 through 57.
So you think there's at least enough rock and roll still out there to give you hope that we'll be listening to it in the year 2010?
Oh, I think so.
And it won't just be on oldie stations?
Yeah. Well, you know, Bob, if you go into like clubs in New York or LA or any big city, and you see what the young bands are playing, they're playing rock and roll, you know, so I don't think it's just a matter of time. I think at the moment dance is real big, and I remember in the late '70s dance got real big with disco. Now they call it dance, you know. And,
yeah.
And I think it just runs in cycles, you know. But I think it'll last. I hope it does.
You know, I've said this before. If you had to pick the three most traumatic eras in American history, you'd probably have to go with the Civil War, Vietnam, and the disco era. Things that kind of shake your faith in the fabric of our nation.
Yes. Yeah. Those great clothes back then. Where are all those clothes now?
Great clothes and a really sincere, you know, bedrock attitude behind this disco stuff.
Yeah. Well, it's just all mechanized, you know, and occasionally people will find a formula that'll work for a while, and then people will just tire of it, you know. I think it's great that young people dance, you know. I like to dance and go to dance clubs and stuff. It's just that some of the music is really, really, it gives me a headache after a while, you know.
There's a monotony to it.
Well, the monotony, the repetition, and yeah.
You made an interesting distinction in an interview that I read a few years ago, where you said that most of the music that you do, and guys like Mellencamp and Springsteen are still doing it, and the people that you listen to and were influenced by,
Tom Petty, Henley,
Graham Parker, whomever,
sure.
this stuff, no matter how large the backup group, is essentially written to back a singer. The singer is at the center of it. Whereas a lot of what we hear today, the singer is almost incidental.
That's true. It's a producer's medium, dance. It really is. It's like machines and sampling sounds. You can sample anything that's ever been recorded, you know. If you get the either the 24 track or whatever, you can get a Led Zeppelin drum sound. You just put it into a synthesizer and say, okay, now we sound like Led, you know, which are great drum sounds, you know, and so it's a producer's medium. I think the dance thing, and I think the singers are somewhat incidental.
Mentioning Mellencamp, he was at least mildly critical of you allowing Like a Rock to be used on a Chevy commercial.
Yeah, and
I assume that he likes your work, and that's why why it mattered to him that you.
I know. The way I look at it is the way John does Farm Aid. You know, John is from a farm community in a farm state, and I am from an automotive state. And they showed me, the advertising agency and Chevrolet showed me how well the commercial had tested. And at the time that they asked me to do it, GM had just lost $1.1 billion in one quarter. And I still turned it down. I turned it down for about 3 months, but they said it was the highest testing commercial they'd ever done. And then I was actually sitting in a bar in Detroit with my girlfriend, and a guy came up out of nowhere and said, how come you never do any commercials for the auto companies and help us out a little bit? And he walked away. He was nice about it, and he walked away. I said, why not? You know, I'm not above this. entire economy, other than tourism in Michigan, is automotive based. There's little mom and pop companies all around the state that are, you know, are tied into the big companies. So if I help them sell a few cars, that's fine.
But you understand the other side of the argument too. Like there was that Neil Young video where you said, "Ain't singing for Pepsi, ain't singing for Coke," and the whole notion is, wait a minute, we created this stuff with a certain attitude in mind. Let's not let it get co-opted.
Right, I understand that too, but I really felt like the deciding factor was really occasionally, and believe me, Bob, I've been offered 10 times as much money as I got from Chevrolet, from beer companies and things like that, and turned it down. My idea was help my local state economy. It's exactly what John does in a you know, with the farmers and stuff like that. And you can say, yeah, John doesn't get paid for that, but and I did, but nevertheless, that's what it took to you know, make me do it. Yeah.
Are you and Springsteen pretty close?
Well, I wouldn't say we're close. We're friends. Yeah, I don't see him that much. We don't live anywhere remotely near each other.
But there was a time when he ran several tracks by you before they had been released and solicited your opinion, right?
Yeah, yeah, it was he was doing The River, and I was selling a lot of. I was having a lot of hit singles, and Bruce was selling a lot of albums. Every single one of his albums had gone to #1, but he wasn't having big hit singles, and so he ran. I can't remember the title of the song, but "Got a Wife and Kids in Baltimore, Jack." Remember that that song? I can't think of the title of it. But he ran that song by me, and he was concerned that there were background singers on it, and would it be too commercial? And I said, no, I don't think so. Yeah. I don't think no one's ever going to accuse you of being commercial, Bruce. You know, you just got too much integrity and everything. And so I was happy to review a couple of his things, and also Born in the USA. I was one of the first people to hear that song. I heard it a year and a half before it came out. I said, that's a smash. You know, yeah.
What does integrity in your work mean to you? How does it play itself out for you?
To me, I think it's just not going with the trends. You know, I mean, I'm not going to go do a rap song. Bruce isn't going to go do a rap song because it's hot now, any more than we did disco when it was hot then. I think that's part of it. I think you can tell. I know I can tell when a songwriter's working hard and when he's cruising through, you know, and just mailing it in. I work really hard on my songs. I know Bruce works really hard on his. I know Tom Petty works hard, and Don Henley, and the people that I admire, you know, work very hard on their songs. And that to me is the integrity factor. If you keep growing as an artist, if you keep pushing the envelope of what you're able to, the type of music you're able to play, you know. Go here, go there, go a little more that way, go a little more that way. Yeah.
Were you a little leery of music videos? It seems to me like it took a while, considering what your success and popularity was, took a while before anything you did was available on MTV or VH1 or whatever.
Well, frankly, we didn't need them. We were doing so well, we just didn't need them.
So that was more the reason.
Yeah.
Than an aversion to that medium.
Yeah, it wasn't really an aversion to it. I think there's an awful lot of bad videos, just like there's an awful lot of bad pop music. But you know, but the good stuff comes through, and I've seen a lot of good ones too.
Unless every Springsteen fan in the audience suffered the same temporary mental block that we did, you already know by now. It's "Hungry Heart."
Yes,
is the song that Bob was referring to earlier when we were talking about Springsteen. And Bob is back Monday night for part 2, and we hope you will be too. Until then, see you later. Thanks for staying up later. Our second night with Bob Seger, and we talked about many of his songs and the things you know him best for last night. But here's a song that people don't know because it was never released. You wrote it in the late 70s or early 80s, and it's called "Can't Hit the Corners No More."
Yeah.
And the lyrics include...
Can't Hit the Corners, actually, yeah. It was the name of the title, but yeah.
Okay. They used to call you reckless. They used to call you fast. They used to call you dangerous, but that's all in the past. Now they call you clever, the quintessential pro. And sometimes now they whisper when you turn your back to go. A grown man in a children's game, a game you once played free. You've gotten old before your time, and you're worried now they'll see. This ain't competition, man. This is war. and you can't hit the corners no more.
Right.
Now, I know you're a baseball fan, and
Yes.
an obvious baseball reference to a fading pitcher. But
Yeah.
did you see yourself that way, as a fading rock and roll guy?
No, it was, it's a thing. Al Kaline was like my favorite baseball player ever,
Yeah.
and I thought what was great about Al was that he retired long before he had to. He just had this pride and stuff. But you do see guys hanging on, and I understand why. And at that time, of course, no, I didn't feel that way. But I thought it was interesting subject matter. I think I was thinking about Catfish Hunter in a way I was thinking about Mark Fidrich and his brief thing in the Sun, which was a marvelous thing in Detroit.
So it was really a baseball reference, as opposed to just using baseball as a metaphor for yourself.
Yeah, it was a baseball reference, but it was also anything, well, it could be any sport, really, or anything that's physical, or heck, maybe even, I don't know, anything that requires youth, in order to accomplish it.
This is a question that's been asked many times before. Does rock and roll require youth? Because now the legendary rock and roll guys, those who haven't truly burnt out, now they're in their mid-40s like you are. Some are in their 50s.
Right. Well, I saw Stevie Winwood on the Letterman special the other night, and he sings exactly the way he did when he was 16, and I don't sing that as high as I used to. I can feel that. I've got to be a little more canny when I'm in the studio, I have to admit. And I wish I had a voice like Stevie Winwood's. You do notice certain things. I mean, it's part of the passage of time. I'm 46 years old. And sure, when I'm up on stage, I get sore now when I come off and stuff, And so to a degree, I can't do what I did in my 20s and stuff like that and give quite the same amount of energy. But I think it's possible for me to continue on. I saw Little Richard about 5 years ago in a club, and he was singing just great, And I think if you're blessed with the voice, I think you can go on. I don't think there's any reason not to.
Fire Inside gets a Grammy nomination. You're still selling lots of records. But do you worry, as a lot of creative people do, that one day you'll wake up and that's it? You'll have writer's block, the fastball will be gone, just like that?
Certain things in my life could change that. I'd never had kids, for one thing. I don't know if you do or not.
Yeah, I got a couple.
Yeah, and maybe maybe part of the reason rock and roll is appealing is because you do have a very free kind of existence. You're traveling all the time. Even when I'm not touring, I like to travel a lot. I seem to find myself all over the country. It's stimulating. I think if I had kids, that might change. I don't know if my music would change, or maybe my desire to make music would change. I think I'll always write songs. I may get out of the making the albums and the performing and stuff like that, and just be a songwriter and let somebody else do it. My stuff. I think that would depend on what happens when I finally do have a family, and I would like to have a family.
Would you feel comfortable, you think, writing stuff for other people? Because it seems like your material is matched to your persona, your voice, your stage presence. Well matched. That's part of the reason why people like you.
Thank you. And I think in a perfect world, I would like to continue to make records, and be able to stay at home. I don't know if that can be accomplished. You've got to go out, you got to make videos. They really want you to tour. They want you to do things like this, and travel around and go on shows and things. And I think if I had a child, I think I'd want to be there for those formative years. I'd want to do my share, and yeah.
You've never really done anything quite like this before, though, right? They told me as you walked in the studio you'd never done a long-form television interview.
No, I never have. And I like your show, and that's why I did it.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah.
You think there's some element of mystery, therefore, about you? Because you strike me as very accessible, so you don't strike me as the kind of guy who would be attempting to cultivate this mystery about himself.
No, I've never been mysterious. It's just, I don't know. maybe I'm just more comfortable with interviews now after all these years. You know, I think I'm a driven person. I have to admit it. I mean, when I'm writing, sometimes I was in my home studio last night really late, and I knew I had to come here and everything. I had to take a nap this afternoon. My girlfriend will tell you I'm really driven. But it's just, I love what I do. I think I loved it the 12 years that I did it before I even was big selling records.
Do you feel that you've had an influence on some of your contemporaries or some younger performers, the way that the Otis Reddings and the James Browns and people like that had an influence on you?
Yeah, I think I hear it in people like Bryan Adams, and I think John Mellencamp started out opening up for me, you know, in a lot of areas, and I heard some of it in him too. But I think that they have both moved on, you know, from that. But I do hear. I remember the song "The Rose" that Bette Midler won a whole bunch of awards for. Amanda, who wrote that song, was talking in an article one day that Bette called her up and said, "I want a Bob Seger ballad," and she wrote "The Rose." Okay, so when I see stuff like that, it makes me feel really good, and I definitely hear it. I hear it in other people. Mm-hmm.
This is something that Dave Marsh, the noted rock writer, said about you. He said, even though Seger's songs tend to have characters to some extent, there's less distance between him and his most extreme characters than you'd think.
Yeah.
Springsteen and Mellencamp quite frequently sing of people they don't know, and Dave didn't mean that as a put-down. I mean, Dave is Springsteen's biographer.
Yeah.
But Seger has a knack for keeping things personal, even if he's not singing in the first person.
Yeah, yeah. I really like to write other people's stories. I remember in '78 when I wrote the famous final scene, everybody called me up and said, "Are you breaking up?" You know, and I said, "No." You know, I was writing about a friend of mine who was breaking up. You know, he was a good friend, and I said, "Well, there's subject matter," you know, kind of describing his thing, and I think it's fun to. I guess it's sort of like acting in a way, to kind of crawl into the shoes of someone else and try to imagine it. You know. Maybe I hope it sounds it rings true, you know.
Well, your best stuff though, it does sound like a personal diary, and that's not unique to you. I mean, Paul Simon is a very different kind of performer than you are, and his stuff is a personal diary in one way or another.
Oh yeah, I think Paul and I really are very similar in a lot of ways, except he's just very poetic and has a maybe much greater mastery of the language than I do. But we think very similarly, I think, as songwriters. I really love Paul's stuff.
Do you feel ambivalent at all about your old stuff? Like, the reason why that's brought to mind is I was thinking of Simon sitting in that chair. As beloved as some of the Simon and Garfunkel songs are, there's only about a half dozen of them that he feels 100% comfortable with, I think, when he hears them 20 years later. How about you?
I think I hear the youth, and again, I hear the know-it-allness, you know, of my early stuff. Like I'm saying stuff that is totally wrong that I thought was right, you know, back then. I've got some cockeyed perspectives, but I think overall I'm pretty comfortable with it.
I made a list here. Sure, it's rock and roll, but your stuff, at least the stuff that really resonates with people, it's always about something or other. Like a rock and roll never forgets, about aging and holding on to some kind of values and some sort of consistency.
Holding on to passion, I think that's important.
Yeah, which you've managed to do, I guess, into your mid-40s. Old-time rock and roll sort of takes a poke at fads. American Storm, I guess, was about John Belushi and drugs, wasn't it?
Right, exactly.
They're always about something. Do you find that that's slipping away, too? In rock and roll, or whatever we call rock and roll, popular music now?
I think there's people out there that are doing what Don Henley calls reporting. You know, that's the way he calls writing about things that they feel strongly about, the environment, politics, social issues, inner cities. You know. Drugs, the ills of society, and trying to say something unique about them. And then there's so much to write about, and for me, I also like writing about relationships. As you grow and mature throughout your life, you realize how much less you know than you thought you knew.
Shame on the Moon, or Famous Final Scene, songs like that.
Yeah, and there's these little quintessential moments, and I like to write little miniatures, about a quintessential moment. I've always loved movies, so that I have maybe a sort of a cinematic imagination, as it were. So Famous Final Scene was about that instant of the breakup when oh boy, it really is over and I got to go. And if you can define those little moments, I think it's fun, and it's informative, and maybe it's worthwhile.
There's a line in one of your most popular songs, Against the Wind, where you say, I wish I didn't know now what I didn't know then.
Right.
And yet you almost didn't put it in.
Yeah.
Right? Why?
Yeah. I thought it was bad grammar, but it was exactly what I wanted to say,
Yeah. So did someone have to talk you out of it, or did you come to your senses on your own, or what?
Everybody talked me out of it. Yeah, my manager, my tour manager, my band said, that's a great line, man. I don't care if it's bad grammar.
Yeah. One name we haven't discussed tonight is Van Morrison.
Mm-hmm.
And I know he ranks very high with you.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Is it just the quality of the music, or is it being moved by the integrity of it? I mean, he's still out there plugging away and doing the stuff. And
all the above, I think he has this great poetic built-in thing, and a fantastic voice, which, helps, is a great instrument to deliver it all. And I think what I love about Van, and what I forget to do sometimes, is I can tell when Van is just like drifting into sort of a zone. Maybe like when Vinnie Johnson's shooting jumpers or something.
Right. The old piston, as the Detroit roots come out.
Yeah, and where he just drifts into a place where the whole world is shut out, and he's just singing, and you can tell that he's in that spot. He's like, it's almost a dreamlike, trance-like state when he's singing sometimes, and that's really what music is all about. It's almost a jazz concept, if you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. You just kind of go out and you're what's the word? You're just winging it, And I love that about Van, is that he will risk that. He will go on and on and on, and he won't fade the ending before the magic happens, as it were. Yeah.
What's the most interesting reaction that you've ever gotten to one of your songs? Because songs strike people different ways. They may make people feel an emotion that wasn't necessarily what you intended.
Yeah, and I think that's what you try to do. You try to leave them as open-ended as possible, but I don't know. I always feel real good, Bob, when I get some reaction to songs that aren't as well known. There's songs, deep in the album, like on the Like a Rock album, there's this song called Somewhere Tonight, and I've gotten a whole lot of mail on that one. People say, what a great song, boy, I've been there. On this new album, Long Way Home, seems to be getting a lot of mail to me. People are just really touched by it, and anytime, that's why I do this, that's why we all do this, to make that emotional connection. That's worth everything.
Here's a strange one, and I was unsure whether I would tell you this, but I will. Still the same, okay, with the references to someone who cannot, for better or worse, change their essential character.
Right.
And the line about the gambler.
Yeah.
My father was a compulsive gambler. My father was a really funny guy. He died when I was 18 years old.
Yeah.
He was funny. He was smart. He had a personality that could fill a room. But he was a compulsive gambler. I mean, he would gamble the rent money.
Right.
On baseball games, football games, whatever. His intellect, you would think, would lead him away from that. But emotionally, he could not get away from it. And I had a dream about him the night that I first heard that song. I was driving around. I was about 24 years old in St. Louis, and I heard it on the radio. There was still top 40 radio then, so it was on some top 40 station. And that night I had a dream that I was in a casino in Las Vegas. And I had never set foot in a Las Vegas casino in my life. But I was walking through the casino, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw my father at the craps table. And went over to talk with him. And things get filled in as dreams do, where
Right.
you just know all the basic information you need, even though it hasn't played itself out. And I tried to talk him out of it. And why he had been reincarnated wasn't clear, but
Wow.
he could not change. And there he stood.
Yeah.
And the soundtrack of this
Yeah.
dream
Yeah.
was still the same.
Yeah. That's wild.
And that's the first thing I thought of when you walked in here. We hadn't met before today. But
Yeah. I think we've all met people like the antagonist in Still the Same, the person that I'm singing about there, where they're just very charismatic, you know, but they have tremendous faults. But part of the appeal is the charisma. You know, you overlook everything because of the charisma. I was actually writing about several people, I won't say who, that I had met throughout my lifetime that made me feel about that, you know, that made that character up. It was kind of a compilation of people, actually. It wasn't one particular person.
yeah, that was what my father was like. And obviously you forgive your father
Yeah.
almost anything.
Oh, sure.
But his strength of personality would make people even outside the family forgive him.
Yeah. Yeah. It's that's a gift and a curse in a way, you know? It is.
You had to forgive your own dad.
Yeah. Yeah. He wasn't a bad guy. He just drank a lot. And he left us when I was 10. And we were pretty, you know, poor. And we lived, I remember at one point we were living in one room with bunk beds. And my brother and I were sleeping up top. My mother was sleeping down below. And the only money we had coming in was from my brother working as a pack boy at a supermarket. And my mother cleaning houses. And I was going to junior high, you know, and you know, I still, you know, he died in 1968 in L.A., but I don't really hold any grudges against him. I think if I've got, and I'm certain I've got wounds, I haven't done that. I've been in therapy a couple of times in my life for short periods of time, but I think I've overcome it. I think maybe one thing that I think I'm going to be a very attentive father when I become a father, overly attentive for that reason, if you know what I mean. I'm going to try to make up for that. I don't know if that has any meaning or not, but I know when I have a kid, I'm going to, the one thing I'm going to try to do is not be what my father was.
We enjoyed these 2 nights with Bob Seger. Hope you folks did too. Thank you, Bob.
My pleasure. Thank you, Bob.
Okay, we'll see you later.